Okay, now you know the rules, right? They're pretty simple rules. That's why it's rigged against people. Because in this world of accumulation, we're taught high risk equals high return, save early, save often, put money in whether the market's going up or down, and yet that's not the rules that they're playing by. They're high risk. What's their high risk? Your money's at risk. They're getting paid whether you make money or not. Obviously, they'll get paid more if you make more. They're completely in the business as a financial institution on cash flow. So we're going to focus on cash flow investing and improving your cash flow. I'm not yelling when I start getting, like that. It's just passion coming through. So don't feel like you've done anything wrong, even if maybe you have financially. I'm not yelling at you. I'm keeping the energy going on a topic that's normally dry and drab and boring and painful. And it's not going to be any of that while we're here, because I'm not going to ask you to cut back or sacrifice or delay or hope that one day, someday, you're going to have this pile of money and now you can live the life that you've always wanted to. It's going to be about enjoying life along the way. It's going to be like what Benjamin Franklin said. He said, wealth isn't just the man that has it, but the man that lives it. So it's about enjoying life and living wealthy, because your greatest asset is you. It's not a stock, it's not a bond, it's not a piece of real estate. It's your ability to produce, to create value, to solve problems, to serve other people, and that's the real formula for wealth. This whole formula and notion that somehow if you just save enough money that you'll be okay has proven to be an absolute failure. It's called the accumulation philosophy. The accumulation philosophy is setting aside money outside of your control. And you've probably heard the term diversification before, right? I like to call it diversification, and I did steal that from Warren Buffett, so don't quote me on that. But diversification is where you take money away from places that you know, that you understand, and you set it aside in something else because you feel some level of guilt that if you don't start saving enough money, if you don't start saving early enough, and if somehow you don't automate that investing, that you're going to miss out. But the reality is you start missing out on things that you're more in control of. And what we're going to go through over the next 2.5 days, 3 days, is that it's a path to economic independence. It's a journey to financial freedom. And financial freedom isn't really kind of what financial people sell it as. It's not having a certain amount of money in a bank account. Because financial freedom is a state of mind. It's a state of being. It's when money is no longer your primary reason or excuse why you do or don't do something. So it's no longer your primary reason. It's still something you take into consideration. But most of the world is stuck in this mindset where they're always worried about money. It's their primary focus. And if they don't feel like they have enough, they fall into scarcity. And so we begin there. There's really two determinant paradigms that really are responsible for all outcomes in the world. One is the scarcity mindset. It's a place of fear, doubt, worry. It's a thought process of the consumer condition. And the consumer condition states they look to take more money from the world than they give to it. They look to take more value from the world than they give to it. It's where entitlement exists. I'm sure you've seen this. You've been around people that are in scarcity. How exciting is it to be around someone in scarcity? Usually the conversations consist of complaining, of blame, of the latest political issues and the latest problems, but there's never a talk about the solution. There's never a talk about responsibility. And so scarcity, that no matter how much luck, saving, discipline, rate of return, or no matter how great your financial advisor is, scarcity is the greatest destroyer of wealth. And none of that matters if you're stuck in it. So it takes a shift into this mindset of abundance. Abundance doesn't mean that we go frolic in fields holding hands in a Zen-like state and that everything's always perfect. It just means that ingenuity, innovation, it means that resourcefulness is key. And that even if there's only a finite amount of something in the world, like there's supposed to be a finite amount of money, but while I'm talking, they're printing it right now, right? And do they have to print it anymore? Or does it just show up on a computer screen as some dots at this point, right? Even if there's a finite amount of something, there's still all these different ways that we can come up with new ideas, new systems, new technologies, new ways of bringing something out there. So even if there's only a certain amount of oil, there's a different form of energy than just oil out there. Thomas Malthus, anyone ever heard of this guy, Thomas Malthus? He said hundreds of years ago that we were going to run out of food. Now, we haven't run out of food. Now, what would qualify as food, maybe, in some cases. And by the way, I'll just point this out. the best way for this to go extraordinarily well is laugh at my horrible jokes. That really does help out. I always tell my wife that I want to be a comedian, and she always reminds me of just one incident in Costa Rica where a band finished playing in front of a room of a couple hundred people, and there was a mic up there, so I figured that was my chance to do some stand-up comedy. And she left the room promptly, and then when she came back and people were laughing, she's like, they're not laughing at the jokes, they're laughing at you being a joke. And so, very painful as I bring this to you. But I tell her that when I do events, people laugh. She's like, you're making them money. Of course they're going to laugh. It's a courtesy. It's they want to do really well, so they're just going to appease you that way. But I don't care. It still feels the same, you know? Feel free to laugh at all of this. Be abundant with your laughter, really. So abundance is this producer paradigm. And the producer paradigm is where people seek to contribute more to the world than they take from it. It's a mindset. It's a way of life. It's a way of being. So even if you didn't have the right amount of money to do something in the moment, rather than in scarcity where people would just say very defeatingly, I can't afford it, people in abundance would say, what would it take to afford that? How could I afford that? What type of value could I create? How could I be more resourceful even if I don't have all the resources at my helm right now? Because there isn't just one type of capital. Financial capital is a lot like a receipt. It's like going to the grocery store, you get a receipt at the end and they don't even give them to you all the time anymore because I don't want pieces of paper floating around, right? So the receipt is just evidence of something. What's it evidence of? Of the meat, the potatoes, the vegetables. Yet most people wake up confused, only thinking about how to get more money, which is just one form of capital. But what I'm committed to over the next couple of days is to help you with two other precious forms of capital. The first one being mental capital. Have you ever heard the sentiment or saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know? That's not really true, because if you know nothing, no one wants to hang out with you. No one's going, oh yeah, I can't wait to hang out with something that brings nothing to the table, right? What you know is critically important in today's world. As a matter of fact, with the internet and everything that we have, it doesn't even really matter about brawn anymore. It's about brains. It doesn't really matter about force and coercion. It's really about value creation. So if you have mental capital that can really solve some of the complex issues out there in the world, you can get paid extraordinarily well for that. But if you have a lot of knowledge and you never do anything with it, it's latent potential. So what we have to translate mental capital into is how do we take that and serve others, because that's called relationship capital. Relationship capital is people, networks, organizations, family, friends. And look, relationship capital can be positive or negative, right? You might have some negative relationship capital in your life. People that are naysayers, people that don't want to see you do well, people that constantly complain and they're stuck in the scarcity mindset. I have a pretty simple equation for that, by the way. I just call it friends versus friendly. Friends are people that I invite to things. I say yes to their invitations, and people I'm friendly with, I always say no to their invitations in a polite way, and I never invite them to anything. And that's pretty simple, right? Try it on. You know, next time someone invites you to something, you don't want to hang out with them, they're not a good person for you to be around, just say, hey, I appreciate that. That's not going to happen. But you can say it nicer than that, you know? That'd be kind of funny, though, if you just said, no, that's unlikely. Just see how it goes. And then I once gave someone advice, and when he got in an argument with his wife using my advice, he immediately said, that's what Garrett said to do, and blamed it on me. He wasn't really following my advice really well, but I got the blame for it. So friends versus friendly is one of the important things in relationship capital, because I know you've heard who you spend your time with makes a big difference, but I'm also going to say who you don't spend your time with makes the biggest difference. You can have 10 extraordinary relationships that are game changers in this world, and one absolutely negative relationship can wipe all of that out. So the equation that we're looking at is take your mental capital, multiply it by your relationship capital, and that will determine your financial capital. So if you think you have a money problem, it's never a money problem. It's an idea problem or a people problem. That's what it is. Money was just the scorecard. It was just the benchmark. It was just a symptom that you either don't have the right information. So let's give an example. There's a lot of people that will ask me like what a good investment is, or should they invest in something. And first of all, if you have to ask me that, you're probably not ready to invest in that just yet. You know, if you have to ask, is this a good investment? Because the real answer is a good investment for whom? I mean, it depends. I believe in investor DNA, and your investor DNA, it's one of the segments we're going to go through to help you uncover and decode it, because when you figure out your investor DNA, the first thing you're going to get back is time. You're not going to waste your time on anything that isn't aligned with your investor DNA. You're not going to listen to pitches and investments that aren't right for you, and you're only going to focus, instead of diversify, on a narrow group of things that is going to produce more return for you. Andrew Carnegie said he put all of his eggs in one basket and watched it like a hawk. Focus over diversification. Look at the billionaires in the world. They didn't get there through diversification. They got there because they were extraordinarily good at one thing. And then maybe when that really paid off and was really powerful, then they chose to start investing in other things. And if it's Carlos Slims from, South America, basically it's all telecommunications being wrapped in there and all complementary to the business. So he's not out there investing in something he knows nothing about. So if you don't know anything about something and you invest in it, risk is in the investor, not the investment. How do you relate to that investment? If it's an investment you don't know or understand, you're taking on too much risk. Does that make sense? So if you really take that into consideration before you invest, that's critically important. And not just having the right information, but also having the right people and team. I wrote a book recently called What Would the Rockefellers Do? And one of the things the Rockefellers invented was a Rockefeller-style family office. What they did that the Vanderbilts didn't do, see, because the Vanderbilts had more money than the U.S. Treasury at one time. Cornelius was a badass. I mean, really, more money than the U.S. Treasury? That's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, 54 years after Cornelius died, the first Vanderbilt died broke. And Anderson Cooper is an heir of the Vanderbilts, but he didn't get any money because of bad decision-making, not having a financial team, and they started to just buy things. Like they owned 10 mansions at one time that some have been torn down, and one's a museum in Rhode Island. It didn't have anything to do with their investor DNA. It had nothing to do with how they made their money, and most importantly, the values, the contribution, and the philosophy hadn't translated to the next generation. Which I don't know about you, but one of the things that I constantly ask myself is, how do I make sure to pass on wealth to my kids so they don't become trust fund kids, or that they don't feel entitled, but instead, it's a blessing instead of a curse? Well, the Rockefellers figured that out in a pretty big way because they're the 6th generation of passing money on. They donated $50 million to charity last year, and their net worth is still growing. Part of that was relationship capital. They built a financial team that worked just for their family. Right? So everyone sat around and they said, we need attorneys, accountants, we need insurance professionals, we need, asset protection people, we need fiduciaries and investment people. And they sat around and worked on the Rockefeller estate to make sure it's preserved, protected, and perpetuated. Some good alliteration right there, right? I've said it before. It wasn't that impressive. I had it in my head already. So, but this is a big deal. Because if you look at, if you're a business owner, we all know how important it is to hire good people. We know how essential a good team is. Yet if you look at your financial life, have you taken the same amount of care and concern to build a good financial team? Have you thought about whether or not they're A players? If they're out looking for you and looking after you to make sure that you're protecting your wealth and that everything's integrated and coordinated. When I was 22 years old, I went into a family office in New York. I was shadowing this financial guy, and they had told me he's like the best guy in the world at the time. And so it took me about 3 years because I started in the financial business when I was 19, basically peddling products to family and friends, nothing all that impressive. When they tell you an internship, what they don't tell you is your internship is to bring your people to us so they can buy stuff from us. So bring family and friends. And I did that, but I wanted to get better at it. So at really making an impact and doing something different than just selling mutual funds and life insurance. And so I started to study the best that I could find. And for 2 straight years, I went somewhere once a month. And one of these times I went and I shadowed Vince. I paid him, I said, I'll just be a fly on the wall. And he's in New York. He's like, you're not allowed to talk at all. I'm like, great. I won't say anything. And we walked in a family office. And this one, he said, was low end because you only had to be worth $50 million to work with him. I was like, 50 million? I wonder if my whole town I'm from, East Carbon, where I first grew up, is worth 50 million if you add everybody up. I don't think so. I think it's a negative net worth there now. Coal mines, yeah. So anyway, I walk in, I sit down, I'm watching this, and he's presenting a strategy, and everyone around the table is doing real due diligence. Now, in the world of finance, due diligence is like Sasquatch. You hear about it all the time, but you never see it, right? It's almost impossible for a financial person to do due diligence if they're selling you a product because they have a bias, whether they're a good person or not, because that's how they get paid. So they're going to see kind of the best parts of that better than they're going to see what the downsides are. And when I saw that, I was like, this is pretty fascinating. And so he presented a strategy. They didn't implement it for 4 years, that strategy, because of all the moving pieces and parts and making sure it was going to work out. I was like, this is what I want to build. This is what I've got to create in my own life. And this is what other business owners deserve that have high revenues, that are the working wealthy, but not necessarily high net worth, right? So back to this whole concept of scarcity versus abundance. Scarcity is fear, doubt, worry. It's looking to take more than you give. It's thinking that someone else is going to do everything for you. It lacks responsibility. It's always in fear of something, not being enough. And it's this notion of the finite pie. Another useless fact about me that will relate to this story, I always kind of want to be a rock star. Maybe that's why I have long hair and all that kind of stuff. I actually host a rock star party once a year. And like one year the band showed up and they looked like an 80s band, and then they got dressed up and I was like, damn, these guys, like, this is really still their life. They didn't realize the year that it is now, right? They're still stuck there. And I always usually play a song or two with them and then break a guitar and all this kind of stuff. Like I said, just useless facts for you on this rock star notion. But because I want to be a rock star, my wife bought me Rolling Stones thinking this was a rock magazine. It's more of a political magazine. And the very first issue that I opened up had this article called The Finite Pie. And it was showing this really massive guy, bigger than the buildings, drawn as a cartoon, eating a pie and little crumbs coming to the rest of the people. And it was completely an expression of scarcity. It's that if one person has wealth, it means the next person has less. And that was the entire argument of the article. And I immediately started to question this. And the first thing I recognized is, hey, if we look now versus 300 years ago, do you think that the average person is wealthier or less wealthy now versus 300 years ago? I mean, massively more wealthy. You can eat pot brownies, play Xbox, and have air conditioning in a jalopy car and not even have a job in today's world. Back then, you starved. You just starved because you had to go out and kill what you eat, There was no food. If you wanted music back then, you had to hire an entire quartet to show up, so you had to basically be royalty. Now, we had a radio listener that was a homeless lady that had a radio transistor thing that she could listen to. I mean, it's like we just have a lot more wealth simply because exchange creates wealth. Exchange creates wealth. And things aren't finite. Every time there's a good service, experience, or something that happens, that exchange brings two parties to be wealthier. So, for example, let's say I was going to sell you this book, right? I know what's in the book. I wrote it. Do you have this book yet? Did I give this to you yet? Let's say I was going to sell you this. Do you have this? Okay, see, it's a little bit more valuable now that you don't already have it, right? So this sells for like $400, right? But I wrote it. I'm on it, so I don't really need it. So it doesn't have a lot of value to me. Now, could you get this and have it be worth more than $400 for you? Could I be winning as well if you paid me $400? So both of us end up wealthier, right? Thanks for participating. I'll just give it to you. I'm not actually trying to sell you anything. And plus, you may not know him, but he helped me out when I was in Atlanta, so I'm helping him out. Just a little gift back, a little reciprocation. But see, two parties can end up wealthier. You can hire someone. They can do something for you that you couldn't do as efficiently or you may not want to do. And by the way, there's people out there that are sick enough to do the things that you hate, right? The woman that organizes my garage is crazy, and she loves it. She works extra hours for no pay because it's part of her obsession, right? Or once the New York Post wrote about me, they said, if you follow Gunderson's principles in killing sacred cows, then we're never going to have garbage men. No one wants to do these kind of jobs. But what they don't realize is just up the street from where we're recording here, there's a place called Brigham City, Utah, where the head of the sewage treatment plant loves his job. He will talk to you literally about crap all day if you let him. Like, people are just weird, right? You got to love it. There's this like divinity to diversity, and there's people that are willing to do things that you're not as good at that allow you to leverage your time to do what you do very best, and that's why wealth can exist. And if we all had the exact same abilities, we had all the same preferences, then it would be really hard to become wealthy because we'd just be loners all the time doing everything on our own. So, scarcity, the finite pie. When I wrote Killing Sacred Cows, that's the most important chapter. Because no matter what philosophy, strategy, anything else happens, if you're in scarcity, you're never going to feel wealthy. You're never going to feel truly happy. You're going to have plenty of stress that's invading into your life. And my intention with everything that we do here is it leaves you feeling three feelings. Number one, peace of mind. That you have peace of mind because when we go through today your financial health assessment and figure out from a safety and security standpoint where you're set, where you're not set, and where you have financial blind spots, you'll now know what you need to do, and there isn't this looming, I wonder if I'm okay. Like, have you ever had someone have something happen to them, maybe a health challenge, maybe a car accident, maybe a lawsuit, and then all of a sudden you're like, I wonder if I'm covered. And then that fear starts to creep in. Wouldn't it be nice to know ahead of time if you're taken care of and feel that feeling? The second thing is, I want to help you boost your cash flow. I want to help you keep more of every dollar that you make. Rather than letting Uncle Sam, rather than letting Wall Street, rather than letting financial institutions or insurance company take more than their fair share, because let's face it, the game is rigged against people. It is. I mean, if you're a financial institution, what do you want from people? If you're a bank, what are you looking for? Money, how often do you want it? And how long do you want to hold on to it for? And if someone wants to take a withdrawal, how much do you want to give them back? Okay, now you know the rules, right? They're pretty simple rules. That's why it's rigged against people. Because in this world of accumulation, we're taught high risk equals high return, save early, save often, put money in whether the market's going up or down, and yet that's not the rules that they're playing by. They're high risk. What's their high risk? Your money's at risk. They're getting paid whether you make money or not. Obviously, they'll get paid more if you make more. They're completely in the business as a financial institution on cash flow. So we're going to focus on cash flow investing and improving your cash flow. Instead of me asking for you to save more money and cut out things in your life, I want to find more money while we're here like a financial detective. You've got workbooks. We're going to go through it. You're allowed to hoop and holler and yell from the back of the room. That's totally cool. Because it's kind of exciting to have money coming into your life. And we're actually going to teach you how to set up an account to have guilt-free spending. Has anyone ever had fully guilt-free spending, or do you spend and then you hear your mom in the background? I invited my mom to handle my personal books. So she handles a lot of she's my controller on my personal side. So she gets to see what I spend money on. And one of my favorite conversations is I bought a bottle of wine, and then her and my dad started kind of lecturing me on wine. And I'm not a wine connoisseur or anything, but my dad grew up on boxed wine, so I really don't value his opinion as much, Plus, before that, he was Mormon, so he wasn't even supposed to be drinking. So it's like, I got to be really selective here. But I just value different things, so I have value-based spending. They value having 5 vehicles for the 2 of them. Okay, that's their thing, I just have one for me and one for my wife. We don't need all those extra, but it's not about need, it's about want. And it's not about what other people think you should value, it's about what you value and having full permission that when money shows up that was otherwise leaking or inefficient, that you get to take a portion of that and spend it exactly and however you want. You don't get that in a lot of financial, hey, thanks, yeah. Because if you don't enjoy the money and you don't follow the Rockefeller method, then you just have heirs that are waiting for you to die where they're going to blow it within 3 years anyway. I'd rather you enjoy it and then leave it and then have it continue forward. So we'll be challenging some of the status quo. We'll be challenging some of the things that most people think. And after peace of mind, the next thing I want to make sure that we elicit is financial confidence. I want you to be empowered. I want you to be independent. Sure, I'd love for all of you to work with us, but we can only work with some of you anyway because we only take on 125 clients a year. But I want to make sure that it's not me speaking jargon and sounding intelligent so that you feel like you're relying upon me. I want you to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it works, and really cut through all the crap so it just gets to the heart of the matter so that when you leave here, you've got financial confidence. And finally, if you had your entire financial life completely dialed in, I'd want you to say, what is your vision? Or I want you to have clarity. Clarity of what you're heading, where you're heading, and what you're doing. See, clarity for me meant if I get to a certain spot, I can go with my family. We're going to spend 2 weeks this summer in Italy. We're just going to spend 2 weeks in Italy. We're not coming home for any of that time. And we're just going to enjoy life along the way. I'm not waiting until I have a hip replacement to go do these kind of things. And plus, I'm not the kind of guy that just wants to sit on a beach for, the rest of my life, throwing rocks and drinking a Corona till my liver gives out. I want to take little bursts of that and then come back, because the people who are most successful in this world, their purpose is greater than their profits. There's plenty of people that could have stopped working a long time ago. Does Elon Musk still have to work? Does Bill Gates still have to work? No, but they choose to because they're engaged in something that matters to them. And because they're so powerful in it, there's a lot of money that comes in from that. And there's a certain point where it can't be about the money anymore because they can't spend the amount of money that they have as it is. It's about the impact. And that's what I mean by clarity. Clarity on what you want to do in your life, what you choose to do with your life. And once again, one of the easiest ways for people to get there is when you have financial independence, and let me define that. Financial independence, I might even call it economic independence, is when you have enough recurring revenue, investment income, or entrepreneurial income. And entrepreneurial income would be that income that comes in even if you don't show up to the office, right? Entrepreneurial income isn't the income where you have to be involved with every step of the way and you're the one doing the sales and you're the one building the relationship. It's when you have a team and you've been able to scale the business where some of that income comes in. And you still have to monitor it. You're still responsible. It's not completely mailbox money, but at least if you can go a day, a week, or maybe even a month and that money still comes in, it would classify as entrepreneurial income. When you have enough of that coming into your life to cover your expenses, that's economic independence. Why that's critically important? Anyone in here not select themselves as an entrepreneur, but they married an entrepreneur and thinks a little bit differently than the entrepreneur? Like possibly thinks they're too aggressive. You want more stability than they have to offer. Economic independence means that we don't have to compromise and say, okay, I'm not going to spend money and invest in my business. I'm going to make sure that everything goes to the family. No, if you have economic independence, that's the permission slip for you to swing for the fences in what you're doing, knowing that your family is taken care of. You have your foundation handled, that you're going to be okay. You're not going to be out on the streets selling your home or begging for food or having to go to in-laws or any of that kind of stuff, simply because economic independence is a state that most people never achieve in their life because of the accumulation philosophy. The accumulation is set money aside, and then one day, someday, you're going to have a nest egg, and then you get to live off the interest. How brilliant for the 4 rules of institutions, right? Because their belief that wealth comes from, and I'm going to actually write a little bit on this. Their belief is that wealth is an equation. And this will pop up here. So that their belief is it's money. So you've heard the notion it takes money to make money, right? That's not really true. It takes value creation. It takes mental capital. It takes relationship capital. Sure, your money can make money, but it doesn't take money to make money. It takes value. But they'll tell you it takes money, and then that's multiplied by a rate of return. And most of the time when we hear, if you want to get a good rate of return, what are you supposed to do? What do you have to take? High risk. Now, if this were true, we would buy lottery tickets and we'd all be wealthy because that's pretty damn risky, right? But risk is actually defined as chance of loss. So taking higher risk doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get a higher return. My belief is the further away from your investor DNA that you invest, the more risk you take. So instead, invest what I would call close to home or where you have knowledge. Invest in things that make sense to you. I don't invest in technology because I get in technology conversations where I don't even know what the hell they're talking about. The number of acronyms that they use, holy shit, like what does that even mean, right? So I'm not going to invest in that. Bill Belichick, they interviewed him recently from the Patriots, and he's like, I don't know Snap Book and Face Chat and all these kind of things, So I found that kind of funny because he probably really does. But so high risk equals high return is a faulty notion, but they want you to believe that. Then they tell you it's all about the amount of time that you take for this, right? So multiplied by time. So money times rate times time. That's the accumulation philosophy. If you just set enough money aside, you do it for long enough, and you take high risk because you're in it for the long haul. It's okay if the market goes down because the market goes down and the market goes up. You just got to wait for it. But you know what? We did a little research from 2000 to 2015, adjusted for inflation. The market didn't do 10% per year since 2000 BC like they want you to believe. It did 8.4% total, yet people put their money at risk. Now, do you think most financial institutions did better than 8.4% that their clients got? Because they got their fee year in and year out, whether they made money or not. This is a faulty equation. It really sucks. And by the way, if it doesn't work out and you go read the magazines, what they'll tell you is, oh, if this doesn't work out, you can move to Ecuador. It's really cheap there. I'm not even making this up. It really is some of the advice that they give. Now, forget that your family's not there. Forget about some of the diseases and whether the water's clean or not. Just it's cheap, right? Okay, so that would be one thing. Or they say, this didn't serve you well. You're not economically independent. Just add more money. Just add more money. Well, that sounds great. It didn't work. Let's put more in. Would we ever use that advice in our business? Yet somehow that's crept into the financial world. Just put more money in? No. And by the way, they say time value of money. It's all about starting early. So by the time you now know it's not working out and you're putting more money in, it doesn't have time to grow. That sucks. You take risk, you go against what the biggest, best investors in the world talk about. You know, people like Warren Buffett says he detests risk. He hates it so much that the most risk he's willing to take is he might eat cottage cheese the day after expiration, right? You know, his rules, like number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, refer back to rule number 1. Most of the people in the world would have a lot more money if they just protected their downside. So in day 2, I'm going to talk to you, how do you protect the downside of your investments? How do you start creating strategies to manage risk? And I don't want you just to wait for 30 years because compound interest kind of takes 30 years to do something. If you look at compound interest, it's usually one of these things where it's like, okay, the first few years, it's good, but then it's always this last 10 years where you get that growth curve and that hockey stick kind of thing. Well, what if we could just get you there in 3 to 7 years? Wouldn't that be better? That's what we're here to do. 3 to 7 years. 3 years, if you're already really frugal, you're saving all your money and we help you with a better methodology. 7 years if you're kind of addicted to lifestyle like me. I'm the 7-year guy. It took me 7 years because I like the finer things. And I believe a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. You know? Yeah. You start hanging out with people and they introduce you to certain foods and it's really hard to go back to what you're eating before. You know? And I would tell you what I eat, but then animal lovers get mad, and that kind of stuff. But it's, there's just certain things that happen that it's really hard to go back from. I was in my mid-20s before I ever flew first class. And then once you fly it, it's really hard to go back. I'm a tall guy and, there's people that crowd you. So those are the types of things. I don't want you to have to go back. So it might take you 7 years if you're deep in debt or if you're just really addicted to lifestyle. And for a lot of people, it's only a 5-year deal. So we're going to map that out. We're going to unveil that. We're going to talk about it. And let me begin with the framework right now. So you can open up your workbook and you can go right to page 5. All right? Page 5 is going to unveil this. The first thing to do is to recover cash. This is the 5-lever framework to economic independence. This is the 3 to 7 year plan. So recover cash. How do we do that? There's 4 I's that most people are losing out on. The letter I. The one is overpaying the IRS. 93% of people tip the government. No reason to tip them. They're not good wait staff and that kind of stuff, and you're, sharing your gratitude. They don't even give you a thank you. They just spend it how they want. So tipping the government, the IRS, that's the first I. The second I is investment fees. So there's hidden fees, there's hidden commissions, and this makes a huge difference. Let's say that you had a 0.85% fee, so less than 1%. And you had $100,000 invested and it could do 10% over 30 years. That 1% fee, instead of having a $1.74 million account, you'd have a $1.4 million account. So that less than 1% costs you $340,000. These things matter massively, right? It's like being on an airplane and having a headwind versus a tailwind, a huge deal. The next one is interest. Most people overpaying on interest. So you can renegotiate interest rates, you can restructure loans, you can simply do what we call cash flow optimization. We'll take you through that tomorrow so that you can understand exactly how to reclaim that money that's going inefficiently to the institutions. Then the last one is insurance. And I know everyone in here loves paying for insurance, so I don't want to take that away from you. Because of your payments to insurance, they can now beat the beer commercials with better commercials. These geckos, these cavemen, these football players, they're somewhat humorous if you didn't, push past it on your DVR recorder. So, but insurance, there's a lot of duplicate coverages and duplicate costs. It's not about which company you choose as much, it's how you structure things. And a lot of people don't have structure because these order takers of insurance agents don't actually look at how to get the right transfer of risk and the right structure to your policies. Instead, they're simply saying, oh, let me give you a quote with a different company and see if we can beat the price. So those are some of the ways that people are inefficient. And what we want to do is boost profits, recover cash, because that's money that can now go into your financial life to help you get to economic independence, okay? The second piece is to strategically engineer wealth. That's what this first day of awareness is about. To strategically engineer wealth, we're going to look through safety and security, because you're going to have everyone in this room, everybody watching is going to have a financial surprise sometime in their life, and some of you are going to have multiple. The question is, are you going to be prepared for that? Because 95% of the time, it wouldn't have had to be devastating. It wouldn't even have to be that much of a bump in the road once you understand the safety and security part of strategically engineering wealth. So we begin with the foundation, and we figure out where you set, where you're not set, where do you have blind spots. Then from the foundation, we move into more kind of safeguarding, which is how do you really transfer risk? Everything from asset protection to corporate structure to having plenty of liquidity. That is the number one underemphasized thing in the world of finance, is liquidity. Having enough money on hand. One, just because now you have a peace of mind fund, because have you ever been where you don't have any cash on hand, and then all of a sudden you start feeling a lot of stress, you start taking on clients that maybe you don't want to take on simply in the name of making money, or you're working late and then you're not sleeping well. Everything starts to crash down more when you have a lack of liquidity. But the best investors in the world aren't the investors that always stay invested. They're the investors that sit on cash, and then when the opportunity presents itself, they pounce. I read an article once on Ted Turner, and they called him a predatory investor. They said he sat and waited, and then when the opportunity came, when everybody else had been investing all along, and now all of a sudden they were stuck, they were illiquid, or the market was going down, he could now buy when the time was right. That's a different type of investing than most of us have been trained, taught, or educated throughout our lifetime. And then finally, on strategically engineering wealth, it's about growth. It's about investor DNA. It's about money and investing. So we get the foundation done first. Then we build in the safeguards and liquidity. Now it's about investing, but only selecting investments that make sense based upon who you are. And cash flow investments first. Because the number one objective is economic independence first, not accumulation for 30 years from now. All right? Then the third thing is to accelerate investment income. Do you have any lazy assets? Do you have any money that's not producing cash flow for you? 401ks, IRAs, any type of retirement plan that isn't putting money in your pocket, but it's taking money from it. There's a way to do an election to start getting that money come into your life rather than go out of your life without a 10% penalty, even if you're younger than 59 and a half. That would be one example. Or is there latent equity? Is there money that's sitting around that's not doing something for you? What can we do to put that into a cash flowing type of structure? Then, scale business revenue. So scaling business revenue is the key factor for economic independence. It is the number one game changer. You can go read thousands of financial books if you had no other life other than reading financial books. So maybe more like dozens of financial books. But if you read all these books, most of them, and I'm saying like 99% would miss one key factor. They would tell you to save. They tell you to watch fees, some of them. Some of them might even tell you good investments to put money in and how to be a better investor inside of that. But if you want to truly be wealthy, it's about owning a business or having ownership in a business or having upside potential, because that's where wealth is truly built. Tony Robbins wrote a book called Money Master the Game. Anyone read it? 650 pages. So I could save you the time, but sorry, now you already read it. There's some good stuff in the book, but here's where the book is completely a lie. And it's not Tony that's telling the lie as much. Every billionaire that he interviews inside of that book, what do they tell you to do? When you talk to Charles Schwab, he interviews him, he's like, what should people do to become wealthy? Discount brokerage accounts. Guess why he said that? He invented them. So he made it by building a business around that, yet he's telling everybody else to feed that business where he's got leverage and scale. Then they ask Bogle what to do, and he's like, put it in index funds. No, he invented index funds. He didn't make money by putting money in it. He made money by selling it to everyone else because he had leverage and scale. So it goes on and on and on until we hit Mark Farber, the boom, doom, and gloom billionaire guy. And he says, look, if I could only give my kids one piece of advice, it would be find your insider advantage. Find the thing that you do best and build a business around it, because that's where real wealth is made. And so scaling business revenue means that you can actually start to build something that you don't have to be responsible for every little thing, every little minute, like maybe self-employment might be that way, but really where you can start to leverage an idea, a vision, value, because other people are willing to work for it. Look at, do you think that Trump's ever picked up a hammer in his life? Yet he talks this big game about building the most beautiful and biggest buildings in the world. Simply, he's selling a vision which has a lot of leverage and scale. That's why he gets a lot of attention, but people are excited to go and build these types of things and get paid for that. That's scale, right? Scale has to do with this. This is what it comes down to. The rarest commodity in the world, the rarest, is vision. Vision is the rarest commodity in the world. And vision is the greatest deliverer of value that the world has ever seen. And dollars follow value. So most people think hard work is what constitutes value. But the thing is, I grew up in a coal mining town. Do you think that there's people that work harder than coal miners? I mean, coal miners work pretty damn hard. But how many coal miners do you know that are extraordinarily wealthy? They didn't have a lot of vision. It's dark in there, right? They're crawling around. I mean, it's not an exciting thing. So it's just harder sometimes to sit and think about vision and make vision compelling enough that it doesn't sound like every mission statement that you've ever seen on every wall that is so blah, blah, blah and meaningless, like we're good at customer service, we care about our customers and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about vision like JFK saying, we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely home within this decade. That's vision. People showed up differently the next day. For us, vision is 1 million entrepreneurs to economic independence, changing their financial future and their family's destiny. That's our vision. We're not here to simply get higher returns in the stock market. We're not here, we're here very specifically for a reason that we want to make sure people become economically independent, because when they do, they can be more impactful in the businesses that they own. They can enjoy life a whole hell of a lot more than the stress of not having liquidity or having the market go down. I met with a business owner. He was worth $70 million at the time that I met with him. He had less than $1 million in his 401k, yet he was not sleeping at night, and his business was starting to suffer because of the losses that he was getting inside of his 401k because the market was going down at the time. He'd taken a 10% hit. And I said, well, why do you put money in the 401k in the first place? He goes, well, that's what my financial advisor tells me to do. And I'm like, how do they get paid? Oh, fees on the 401k. That's all that they're going to tell you to do. I'm like, let's talk about the best investments that you've ever had in your life. Number one, he owned an Andy Warhol painting that he sold early because of lack of liquidity. I'm like, if you would have held on to it, how much more is it worth now? He said 3.5 times more. He was really good at buying wine. And I said, hey, if you make a mistake buying wine, you can drink it and you'll forget about the mistake. So it's a really good scenario there anyway. The third thing is he built a home that Oprah featured on when she used to have her regular show before the Oprah Winfrey Network, because of how smart of a home it was and how cool it was in St. Charles. And so I'm like, well, maybe those are better investments for you. And you know what? He abandoned funding a 401k. We used it to buy some land in Bali where he was going to build a nice little spread that he could have out there. And he's in Bali right now. And that was a lot more confidence, a lot more aligned with his investor DNA, stopped doing things that everyone else was telling him to do that even though it didn't feel like it was working for him, he felt guilty about, and he was indoctrinated in this accumulation philosophy. And guess what? Now he's able to focus on his business and have his business grow. So investing, one of the biggest mistakes people make in investing is they invest in things that start to drain their energy or have them lose sleep, because if you invest and it creates or elicits any degree of scarcity or fear, it's not a good investment for you. Regardless of the rate of return of the investment, here's why. Your greatest return is your ability to generate a vision, to produce value within your business, and deliver value for your customers and clients and people you interact with. And if you start investing in something that derails you, distracts you, or harms you, then you're losing your biggest ability to produce, and that's called opportunity cost. And most people can't recognize and calculate that, but I'm telling you, that is the biggest thing. And so this is all on lever 4 here, scale business revenue. The biggest way to do it, build a vision that's compelling enough that other people want to build it with you or for you, right? That's scale. And then finally, make it count. Make it count is about relaxation and rejuvenation. In my 20s, I was a fairly competitive person. I wanted to be the, highest producing financial guy in all the circles I was in. And if I heard anyone doing more than me, I immediately was depressed and hated myself and, lowered my self-esteem and pissed off and all that kind of stuff, because I didn't really have any measures of what success meant. It was just, I had more than anyone else. But guess what? There's always someone that has more than you. Who has more money? Warren Buffett or someone else? Well, the Rothschilds have more money than him. There's always something you can find if you're in that comparison mindset. I think the best thing to compare to is where you came from more than everyone else, because then it's about progress over perfection. But in my 20s, people would always ask, oh, you live in Utah, do you ski? I'm like, no, I own a business. They're like, what are your hobbies? I'm like, business. What do you do for fun? Business. It was pretty much the only answer that I had. I didn't understand this make it count thing, but I was in a program called Strategic Coach, and Dan Sullivan was the founder, and Bab Smith was the president and ran it, and I became one of their top 3 referrers, so I got a lot of time and attention from them. And I remember Bab sitting down with me, and she's like, I think you're great, but I think that if you don't take some time off, you're really going to suffer, and you'll make more money if you take more time off. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. How am I going to make more money by taking more time off? She goes, have we led you astray on anything else? I'm like, no. She's like, will you just start taking some more time off? So I started taking time off, which was a lot like, I think probably what it's like to get over a crack addiction, I remember scheduling a snowmobile outing because I knew in the mountains I couldn't get the phone service with my cell phone. I told the guys I went with, I'm not allowed to make any calls or emails. I'm supposed to be away from the office fully for 24 hours. I thought the world was going to implode. I thought like every client was going to have an emergency. Like I just had all these crazy notions, and it was a little bit tough, but then I got really good at it. I was taking Wednesdays off, and I realized none of my friends had Wednesday off, so I was like hanging out. My wife was a school teacher. I was like, maybe Wednesdays aren't the best day right now to be taking off. But I got pretty good at it. And after the first year of taking all these days off, I made $170,000 more. I was like, you know what it came down to? It was this. You get much more strategic about what you delegate and how you let other people help you when you take time away. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's something called diminishing marginal productivity. Diminishing marginal productivity is when you just get exhausted and worn out. Think of it as like an athlete. Sometimes if they're going into overtime and everything, their legs start cramping up and they start getting extra fatigue. That happens in business. We get this mental fatigue. We get in these ruts and routines. We might be spending more time there, but being less effective. So by taking time off, you come back refreshed, and guess what? When you're refreshed and rejuvenated, your best ideas come, and your best ideas are what drive the vision. And remember, vision is what drives the value. So some of the best things that most business owners can do is take time away from the business, because then other people step up. I remember starting Strategic Coach, calling my assistant Amy and saying, okay, I'm going to fly to Chicago. I'm not allowed to be in contact with anyone in the office during the entire trip. So when I get back, we'll get back in touch. I landed, turned on my phone, 7 messages already from Amy. Now, we could blame Amy, but the real truth of the matter was it was all my fault, because that's what I had told her to do, is bring everything to me. So I kept, as difficult as it was, I didn't get in touch with her till I finally got home. But the second I landed in Salt Lake, I made the call, and I was like, okay, let's go through all this. She's like, go through what? I'm like, well, all your messages. She's like, no, I got it all handled. It's all done. Right? So take time off. Think about what would make life enjoyable. What makes you happy? What are some of the hobbies, the interests? Is it travel? That's why I'm going to spend 2 months in Italy. It's like, when else will I have a chance with my kids at 9 and 11 to go and learn a different language, meet some of my family that doesn't even speak English, and just kind of relax and have some friends over and have 4-hour European dinners, how that type of thing goes. Like, that's better than waiting for 30 years from now, which who knows what's going to happen, because I had 2 business partners that died in a plane crash in 2006, right? Now, I learned really well from these guys, because just a month before the plane crash, Les, one of my partners, came to me and he said, I can't imagine life being any better. I love my life. I remember him saying that so distinctly, and it was actually so much easier to accept him dying at age 35 based upon that conversation. See, because when I first met them, I was smart in some ways, but dumb in others. Like, they liked having me around because I researched, I could present well, some of these kind of things. But at the same time, we'd go to Hawaii, and I would spend less in Hawaii than I would spend if I was still in Utah. It's like, well, we don't need meals. We'll bring our own snacks there, Like, they're off on the beach, hiring photographers, doing night diving, and I'm judging the hell out of them. Like, what wasteful, they're hurting their net worth. I had read The Millionaire Next Door. Anyone read The Millionaire Next Door? Spoiler alert if you haven't read it. If you're willing to be a miser, you can leave behind millions of dollars for people to blow within 3 years, like I said before, right? The Millionaire Next Door mindset is what I had early on developed, where I just thought if I never spent any money, that there would be a whole bunch. But for what reason? To look at dots on a piece of paper? To brag about my statements? I mean, if you never utilize it, what good is it? And so fortunately, these guys really helped me kind of break free from that and start to live a lot better life. And I started making more money, taking more time off, making it count. And now I can think about things like what I wrote in What Would the Rockefellers Do, which is like, okay, what would I want to transfer to the next generation so my great, great, great grandkids would know my name, what I stood for, and have it impact their life, because it would be about philosophy, contribution, values, things that can translate, not just money. That's what Make It Count is about. What are the experiences that you want to have in life? We've chosen as our Make It Count, we always have a trip on the books to look forward to. Because every now and again, life gets hectic. You know, I've got a 9-year-old that acts just like me, so you can imagine the handful that he is. He now has green hair. Must want to be a rock star too. You know, the 11-year-old, very high maintenance kid, loving, super sweet soul, but, you know, everything's just a little extra time, a little extra attention when it comes to school. So I want to spend some time with them now. I want to do things that would be enjoyable. And I want to, when those things are difficult, I want something to look forward to because it's on the books. That's what Make It Count is. What do you enjoy in life? And you heard Demi bring up something called soul purpose. So soul purpose, I know we're talking about that in a financial event here, but what soul purpose is your values, it's your abilities, it's your passions combined for the highest value, like the highest vision of your life. That's your soul purpose. When things are aligned with that, you're going to feel dialed in. You're going to have energy. You're going to be able to produce more. You're going to have more zeal. You're going to, like, soul purpose is critical. And so Make It Count is about you living a soul purpose life. All right, those are the 5 levers. All right. So what I want you to do now, knowing what this economic independence path is, knowing that this first day is about awareness. Day 2 is about creation. It's about the creation of more cash flow. It's about building out your plan to get there. And then finally, we end with action. What's your action plan? And we bring in the Make It Count. When this is all in order, what additional things would you like to add to life, knowing that you're not having to waste time on other things that weren't handled before so that you can enjoy it along the way? We use the term wealth architecture quite a bit, but what does that mean? Most people end up buying products because someone shows up at their doorstep, makes a phone call, you know, connected through a family or through a family friend. And if you miss the first 3 pieces of wealth architecture, inevitably, the way I say it is someone else has sold you their philosophy before you determined your own. So it begins with perspective. That's the first P. That perspective is what we covered earlier. If you're not in abundance, don't make financial choices during that time. You have to have someone else who is in abundance help guide you through it so you don't make a misstep or have mishap because you're in scarcity. Because scarcity a lot of times tends towards insanity. It tends towards making decisions that are short-sighted, short-term, and don't lead to lasting and sustainable wealth. Here's an example. Someone comes to you, you have to invest in this because the deadline's tomorrow. I immediately say no, even if I'm going to miss out on something good. There's no chance for the right amount of assessment. I had someone that called me just last week. She says, hey, someone's going to lose their home because they haven't been paying on it for 3 years. I'm like, that's pretty amazing. 3 years, and now it's just going to foreclosure, and the foreclosure was going to happen 2 days from the time they called. They said they owe about $69,000. If you look at Zillow, it's probably around $225,000 in value. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I can fly out there. I'm like, I'm not going to disrupt my life for that. I called a few people I knew in the real estate game, like the guy who owns this building here, Bob, and he was like, well, I don't invest in that area. And, you know, once again, didn't have the time for due diligence, because as soon as you start feeling that greed kick in, like I've got to get involved in this, I'm missing out, you're going to make emotional decisions. And the higher the emotion, the lower the financial IQ. The higher the emotion, the lower the financial IQ. So perspective is essential. And perspective is making sure you're in a more abundant mindset, that you're thinking clearly about if you had an unlimited checkbook, if you had endless possibilities, if money weren't an issue or a concern, what would you do? Where would you invest? It's that perspective that we begin with, and then we move to purpose. Because perspective, if you start feeling abundant, if you're familiar with the reticular activator, that's a part of your brain that, you know, you see something like when we're having our first kid, my wife and I started seeing pregnant women everywhere. And before, I didn't really realize how the world was getting repopulated. I'd never seen a pregnant lady. Now they're everywhere, right? Or I bought an Acura, was my first car, and then I couldn't believe how many damn Acuras were on the road. I thought it was a unique thing, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. That's the reticular activator. It kicked in. You start seeing things. So when you're abundant, what happens is you're just going to see so many possibilities in life. This thing hates me. So let's say each one of these circles represents a possibility, right? You start seeing opportunity because you're being more abundant, and that's great. But the problem is, if you say yes to all of this, you have no ability to manage all of that. Your health might suffer, time with family and friends might suffer. There's a lot of things that can start to happen. Or one business starts to suffer because there's not enough attention for it. I know there's books out there called Multiple Streams of Income, but I don't believe in streams, I believe in rivers. I believe in the Amazon River, which there's so much life around it. It's so lush that it's kind of dangerous to be around it, right? There's so many living things that are around there that you got to be more mindful of that. And it's so powerful that there's fresh water that's pushed into the ocean for miles because of the Amazon River. There's other streams that dry up when June comes along because they weren't powerful enough. So don't get diversified, don't get distracted, don't prematurely diversify by taking money out of your greatest assets and putting it in some other opportunity that isn't related to your investor DNA, because when we put the word premature before things, that's usually bad, right? Like premature babies. I don't know, Walker, your head went somewhere else, man. I don't know what you were thinking, but so don't prematurely diversify. So purpose allows us to be like a laser and focus in and hone in and say, okay, these might be good opportunities, but they're not the right opportunities for me because I'm only going to focus on a few things. So you say no to a lot of things. Warren Buffett said the difference between successful people and highly successful people is the amount of times they say no. Highly successful people say no a lot more than successful people. They reserve it because they're purpose-driven. They're saying, these are the only things I'm going to focus on, these three things. Focus over diversification, one of the main tenets here at the Wealth Factory. Then we move into building the plan. Your plan. We will be building that plan with you today so that you know what you want to accomplish and what needs to happen. Then you bring in the professionals. You select the professionals. You say, I want a good attorney, a good accountant, a good insurance professional. You're actually driving that based upon the plan that you built before that gets involved, which might have commissions and things like that. And then finally, the products. That's wealth architecture. Begin with perspective, end with products. Most people begin with professionals, buy a product. They don't have a plan, and therefore they're fragmented. Therefore, they have risk. Therefore, it's not coordinated. And when there's a lack of coordination and integration, money gets lost and risk gets taken. Okay? Some of that money lost is just inefficiencies and overpayment of some of the 4 I's that we've already talked about. Other times, it's just money's lost because you don't know everything that's going on. So that's the wealth architecture. And if you flip it over, page 4 gives you some of the main premise. I was on a podcast just the other day. They said, do you have a financial philosophy? I said, as a matter of fact, I have 20 points. It's my financial philosophy. And they immediately called me a nerd. They're like, oh, just 20 points? I'm like, yes. So just quickly, no one individual is an expert in everything. So why did the Rockefellers have a family office? Because there was multiple people that helped them out. Experts in tax, other experts in investments, other experts in legal structures. So you can't have one person serve every aspect. I see people who might be really good at property and casualty insurance working for State Farm, but then they're trying to sell a Roth IRA because they get a bonus for selling a Roth IRA. They know nothing about investments or Roth IRAs. It's just something that's a mandate from a company to continue to monetize. And you know what they call that in the financial world? If you don't do that, leaving money on the table. Leaving money on the table. I always argued with financial firms and they say, oh, we don't want to leave money on the table. That's just opening up for someone else to come in and steal the business. I'm like, don't get involved in stuff you suck at. That's stupid. You're just opening yourself up to actually have piss poor performance. And yeah, you have more things going on and less that you're actually amazing at. The second thing is everyone has a sole purpose. That should be the beginning of the plan. Who are you? What are you about? What do you want in life? And it has to be personal. Personal finance needs to be personal again. It's not just about a transaction that everyone should do a 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage or an interest only, or some people should pay the home off or others might not. It depends on your circumstance. We're going to teach you what's called cost of money and understand opportunity costs at a deep level so you can make better choices and decisions and be empowered. But it's really about who you are, where you invest, what your opportunities are, what your timeline's like. And I've already mentioned that you are your greatest investment, not the stock, the bond, or the piece of real estate. It's you, right? So risk is in the investor. Is that a good investment for you? There's people in the room right now that are really good at fix and flips and buying cash flow real estate. And if you're going to dabble in that, they're going to beat you because they're spending their time getting educated, treating it like a business, and immersed in it. So if you think you're just going to dabble in something because you heard someone else did good at it, it doesn't always translate. Who are you? Where are you paying attention? Where do you have your abilities? Invest first and always in yourself. We talked about investments, cultivating an abundance mindset. Don't invest in things that drag you into scarcity because you don't understand how it works, or you say, oh, it's really confusing. I just trust this really smart person I handed the money over to, which is usually the beginning of a Ponzi scheme, right? I don't know what's going on. I just hand the money over. Yeah, a lot of the people that have those kind of things sound really smart because they have to conform the complexity with a lot of language that actually is part of the deceit, right? Economics and peace of mind should be in harmony. What that means is don't invest in something that takes away from your peace of mind, but at the same time, make sure you know what you're investing in, because you could have peace of mind, but it doesn't make economic sense. Here's a prime example. You're 55 years old, you've got $500,000 in a 401k, and you're still contributing money to that. How's it gonna grow? Are you gonna wait till you're 85 for the compound interest curve to kick in? There's no real benefit other than you're gonna have to pay tax on the back end, there's fees, and it's a pretty short time period for the market. So that would be an example of not making economic sense, but bringing about peace of mind. But on the other hand, something can make economic sense, like maybe you could get a mortgage for 3%, and you know for sure you can earn 4% on your money. But your spouse says, if we could just pay off the home, I would feel infinitely better and I could be more supportive about your business. We had someone that went through our workshop once that said that. He sold 11 businesses since the time he paid off his mortgage. Pretty good rate of return, right? If he didn't pay it off, she would have been stressed, nagging, frustrated, and it would have been unfair because that was her, that was her kind of feeling of safety and security, and now she could be more supportive. So even though it may not have made economic sense to pay it off, it brought about a peace of mind that allowed them to be more productive. So you have to look once again at the individual. This is a personal situation. Two final things that we'll cover in this, and I'll bring the rest up throughout the event. Focus over diversification. Now, when I say that, that might elicit some fear for some people. Like, no, if I don't diversify, I'm taking on too much risk. But remember, strategically engineering wealth says foundation first, safety second, and how do we protect the downside with investments? Put all your eggs in one basket and watch it like a hawk. Put all your eggs in one basket and insure them well. When you have too many baskets, it's hard to keep track of it. And this whole nest egg kind of concept of I'm just gonna set money aside, then one day, someday, I'm gonna live off the interest, you fell into those 4 rules of institutions. And when people live off just their interest in retirement, it is a pretty dangerous place to be. Number one, what if taxes go up? But your income just got hit, right? If you're living just off your interest. Number two, what if interest rates are low? They've been pretty damn low for a pretty long time. That's been pretty hard for a lot of people to retire on. Number three, what about inflation? It confiscates your purchasing power year in and year out, so you have money that's there. But I have a friend from Texas that called it the Alpo Curve, and I was like, Norm, what's the Alpo Curve? He goes, it's where you take 1 scoop of Alpo dog food, add it to your ground beef every day for a year, and then the second year, 2 spoons, because eventually inflation's gonna kick your ass and you're gonna be eating dog food, but you won't notice because you slowly integrate it into it. Not my joke, that's his bad joke, but it kind of makes the point, right? We don't want you in that situation. Here's the formula that we're aiming for. Here's what we wanna do. What we wanna do is called velocity, okay? So quick economics lesson. GDP divided by M2. M2 is the money supply. GDP is the output for economy. That's what's called velocity. So what we're looking at for you is you have your own GDP, or what we'll call output, right, personally. We divide that by your input. That's velocity. Now in the world of finance, they'll say put more money in. That's an input. That doesn't necessarily increase velocity. Take more risk. That's an input. That doesn't increase velocity. So there's 3 things that we can do. Number 1, you can budget. But I think budgeting sucks. Now, there's some sick people in here that love budgeting. I'm not going to take it away from you. But it's not the only way to live within your means. It's only one of the ways. There's 2 other ways, and the other 2 increase velocity more. One is efficiency, keeping more of what you make, finding out where there's inefficiencies in your financial life, plugging those leaks, reclaiming that cash, and putting it back into the system. That's going to create velocity. Or expand your means. That's scaling business revenue. That's just scaling income. That's increasing your productivity and your overall profitability. So we want to keep input fixed and increase output to create velocity instead of that wealth equals money times rate times time, slow poke, horrible strategy that leads to failure 92% or more of the time. This is something that is going to be the foundation of getting you there in 3 to 7 years. That's why we call this the Wealth Acceleration Workshop. This is about acceleration. It's about velocity. So we've covered scarcity versus abundance. It's about abolishing scarcity, embracing abundance. We've covered, cash flow in the 5-lever framework, recovering cash first, strategically engineering wealth, accelerating investment income to turn the faucet on and have that start producing for you now rather than 30 years from now, scale that business revenue so that you can grow and leverage, and then finally make it count. Enjoy life along the way. There's the 5 Ps, right? The 5 Ps to wealth architecture. Begin with that perspective. Focus on yourself. Invest in yourself. Become a better investor. Get clear about where you want to go. Have that clarity. Have that financial confidence and that peace of mind. Then build in purpose so you know what to narrow down your focus on. Then build out the plan, which is exactly what we're going to do. Finally, select the professionals, and then finally implement the products. That's the 5P solution.
Want to master your money? Want to figure out the things that you could do to improve your finances? Click here and check out more videos like this on Money Matters.